Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of our Chat and Chew. Today, I'm so excited because we will be talking to Ethos Cannabis about the uses of medical marijuana, cannabis, whichever one you want to say, and the use that it really has for the disability community. I am Vicki Landers. I am the founder and director of Disability Pride PA. For those who do not know me, I go by she, they, and I am a white woman, and I have purpley hair and black rimmed glasses. And I have this beautiful green bookcase behind me filled with my favorite Halloween items. Rita Joe, who is our interpreter for today, is here. We want to make sure that this is accessible for everybody. I want to make sure that everybody knows that you can turn on your captions on your individual social media page, so that way you'll have captions on this broadcast. If you have a question about how to turn your captions on, if you go to our website, disabilitypridepa.org/turn-on-captions, you can find out how to turn your captions on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So today I want to make sure that I thank my sponsors, my inclusion sponsor, Highmark Whole Care, our Pride sponsors, Disability Rights PA, Inglis, PA Health and Wellness, AmeriHealth Coterras CHC, Keystone First, and our community sponsor, UPMC. So I am going to get this kicked off. And I'm going to introduce you to Andy Atterbury, and he is a pharmacist from Ethos Cannabis, and he is going to give you a presentation. You can put comments if you're on Facebook into the comments, and I will see them. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so don't think that we're ignoring you. We will be there. We just want to make sure we get through the presentation, because most of you know that once the presentation is done, a lot of your questions are already answered. But if they're not, just make sure that you remind me, and I will make sure everybody gets on and we get those answers for you. So I am going to turn the show over to Andy. And if you have anything, I will be in comments on Facebook and on YouTube. So I will talk to you all very soon. I'll be back at the end of the show.
Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you today. Today, I'm going to talk about medical marijuana and its use here, specifically in Pennsylvania. Just as a quick disclaimer, the content in this presentation really only applies to the medical marijuana program here in Pennsylvania. There's some more general information, but later on we're going to get into some state specifics. Today's presentation is going to be broken down into 4 parts. First of all, we're going to introduce marijuana, talk about what's inside of it and why it has an effect on humans. After that, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the different forms of medical marijuana, again, that are specific to the Pennsylvania Medical Marijuana Program. After that, we're going to be discussing how these forms are used to treat the different qualifying conditions here in the state of Pennsylvania and their various symptoms. And then after that, we're going to start talking about how to get involved in the Pennsylvania Medical Marijuana Program, becoming a patient for those who are interested. So what is marijuana? That's a great question. It is a grassy weed type plant that grows all over the world. It flowers. It is got beautiful, gigantic flowers that contain oils that we find therapeutically useful. But the flowers and their oils are not the only useful part of the plant. It's got gigantic leaves and stalks that can be used to make many different commodities. and even the seeds of the marijuana plant, can be eaten. Very nutritious. Let's talk about what it looks like. So here on the left, you've got a fresh marijuana flower. It's very unique in structure, and they're often picked and then dried. So here in the middle, you've got an image of a dried marijuana flower, and on the surface of the flower buds are these small structures called trichomes. And trichomes contain the oils that contain all the compounds that we find useful from a clinical standpoint. So these trichomes are not as present on the leaves or the stalks, so it's the flowers that are the most useful for us. Marijuana is a very beautiful flower. It produces flowers and leaves that can range in a variety of colors, as you can see to the left here. And it also can produce a very robust covering of trichomes, as you can see on the right. This particular marijuana flower is very, what they would say, frosty. It's got a very generous trichome coverage, meaning it's very rich in cannabinoids, and could be quite potent for that reason. Now, why do these flowers have a use in our society? Well, it's because the components contained in the oils on the surface of the flowers interact with a system that the human body already has in place. We have an organ system called the endocannabinoid system throughout our bodies and our nervous system that is involved in sending messages and regulating how other messages are sent. This is called the endocannabinoid system, and endo means inside. We produce our own cannabinoids, which are chemical messengers that, like I said, send and receive signals. And these messages are received at receptors called cannabinoid receptors. There are two prominent cannabinoid receptors in the body, the CB1 and the CB2 receptors. And again, they're found mostly throughout our nervous system, which is comprised of the brain, the spine, and all the nerves that extend out and then back to it. The CB2 receptor is a little unique in that it's found in our immune system. And there's no one place where our immune system is, right? It's all throughout the body. But the CB2 receptor is found on certain cells of the immune system. And so this is a very widespread signaling system. It involves many different organs, cells, and parts of the brain that control even more areas of the body. So these messages tend to have very wide array of effects. And for this reason, when cannabinoids act in the system, they do a lot of different things. They can regulate pain, inflammation, for instance. They can also affect gastrointestinal processes like appetite. And they can even have a psychological effect on stress and anxiety. Like I said, the plant cannabis contains cannabinoids in the oils that are found inside the trichomes on the surface of the flowers. Most common and abundant cannabinoids found in marijuana plants are THC and CBD. I know that keeping track of all these letters can be kind of tricky, so I'm going to make them very clear for you. THC is the most abundant and well-known cannabinoid. It is thanks to THC that cannabis has a therapeutic purpose, and it's responsible for most of the physical and psychological effects of the plant on humans. Not all of them, but most of them. It also tends to be the most abundant in the plant. In any given marijuana plant, there tends to be far more THC than any other chemical. And so for this reason, we can use a fairly small amount of it to generate a large response. This is what we call a narrow therapeutic window. Because of its effects on the body and the mind, it has to be dosed carefully because, like I said, small changes in dose can have a large change in response. But what makes the actions of THC, a little tricky, are that there's a big difference in response between people. You and I could take the same dose of THC in the same way and feel differently. And that makes my job as a clinician a little tricky, but it allows for dosing and treatments to be highly individualized, which I think is very important. Quite different from THC is CBD. CBD has less of a direct effect on your body's endocannabinoid system, but it does affect the way that THC and the other chemicals in the marijuana plant work. It generally does not have a psychoactive response, meaning it doesn't affect the mind in the same way that THC does, which makes it very well tolerated. CBD is not only reliant on THC and other cannabinoids to have a function, it can be clinically useful on its own. And we have a growing body of literature suggesting that it is useful on its own in the treatment and control of seizures and anxiety. Because CBD is non-psychoactive and has fewer psychological side effects, it tends to be much better tolerated. And for this reason, small changes in dose don't relate to dramatic changes in effect. So unlike THC, where you have to be a little bit more careful, with CBD, it has a very wide therapeutic window, meaning there's a wide range of doses that are well tolerated. Now, the oils in the cannabis plant do not just contain THC and CBD. They contain other chemicals that are like THC and CBD. We call this family of chemicals cannabinoids. And the majority of other cannabinoids are non-psychoactive and play a supporting role, contributing to the therapeutic actions of the flowers and the cannabis plant. They can support the pain-relieving, anti-inflammatory effects. Here are some examples like CBG, CBC, CBN, THCV, and THCA. We're still doing research on the unique characteristics of each of these, which is tricky because usually people get some combination when they're consuming marijuana, but we're learning more about them every day. Also contained in the oils and the cannabis flowers are a family of chemicals called terpenes. Now, terpenes are very common throughout the plant world. They are light aromatic molecules that plants use to talk to each other. Plants communicate quite a bit. They can be very talkative, and they do this with smells instead of sounds. Anybody who's been around a fresh marijuana plant knows that it can be quite smelly, meaning that marijuana is a very talkative plant. And the specific combinations of the terpenes that it's releasing into the environment give each strain of marijuana its unique character and flavor. And as we're learning just with the other cannabinoids, that some of these terpenes may also be clinically useful, not just smelly and not just tasty, but they may relate to the clinical benefits that marijuana has in humans. Here are some examples like caryophyllene, myrcene, limonene, pinene, linalool, and terpinolene. And it's quite common that these are found in various combinations that differ by each strain of the plant. Now, how do you use it? Now that we've covered a bit about the marijuana plant and why it works in humans, let's talk about how we've harnessed its powers for clinical benefit. The first, most common way that humans consume marijuana is by inhaling. And nowadays, we have a lot of different forms that can be used to inhale the components in the oils found in the marijuana flower. Now, when you inhale marijuana or the components in marijuana, the onset of effects is very rapid. The chemical components in marijuana absorb very quickly from the lungs into the bloodstream and begin circulating throughout the body and the brain. And so the onset of effects tends to be very, very quick, almost immediate. However, for this reason, they are also very quickly broken down and metabolized, meaning the duration of effect can also be quite short relative to other forms of medical marijuana. But this fast onset can be very, very useful for unique symptoms. But because somebody is inhaling anything, it can also be irritating to the lungs and the esophagus. And so my patients that have underlying conditions affecting their lungs should be cautioned away from these forms. Now, nowadays, we have the ability to vaporize cannabis rather than burn it and smoke it. And this is a process whereby some technology is used to lightly heat the cannabis flower or the oils that have been extracted out from the flower, just to the boiling point of some of those compounds that we talked about earlier, so that those turn into a vapor that can be inhaled without ingesting any toxic chemicals that are a byproduct of burning plant matter. And so vaporization is a novel way to kind of replicate the classic way people consume marijuana. But this can be much better tolerated and safer overall. And so for this reason, here in the state of Pennsylvania, only vaporization of inhaled forms is permitted. Another way to consume marijuana is to take a product that has been infused with marijuana and have it absorb sublingually or under the tongue. Generally, this is done with oils called tinctures. And we've got an example here of a bottle of tincture. And some companies produce spray tinctures that can be used to spray the inside of the mouth so that the components in marijuana are absorbed through the mucous membranes under the tongue and along the gums and along the sides of the cheeks that have a lot of blood vessels underlying them. This has a little bit slower of an onset overall and a very similar duration to inhaled forms of cannabis. But because you're using a measured dose, your dosing can be a bit more flexible. And thankfully, these kinds of products are produced in a really large variety of strengths and ratios of THC to CBD. Like I said earlier, THC tends to be the most abundant component in the marijuana plant. And so with processed products like tinctures, companies can create ratios and strengths that might not be naturally produced. And thankfully, the oils that are used in tinctures are very well tolerated and benign. The most common carrier oil that we see here in Pennsylvania products is MCT, or medium chain triglyceride oil, which is very characterless, flavorless, and well tolerated. Moving on, I would say the second most common dosage form or way to ingest marijuana is with an ingestible form or an edible form. It's a form that you can chew and swallow that will be absorbed from, broken down in the stomach and absorbed from the gut. Now, a lot of different edible or ingestible forms of marijuana exist, and we're seeing new ones enter the market every day. The most common forms that we've got here in Pennsylvania are capsules, which contain an oil called distillate oil or RSO. That oil does not need to be taken in a capsule. It can also be taken on its own or used to infuse food products. When cannabis is taken by mouth, it tends to have a much slower absorption, but a longer duration. And so in contrast to inhaled forms that have a fast onset, but a short duration, ingestible forms that have a bit of a delay, but then a long length of effect can be very useful for certain conditions and symptoms. The oils that are used in this way can be strain specific, or they can be more general blends of a variety of strains. I usually counsel my patients to take these on a full stomach or in a fed state, as food can improve the absorption of cannabinoids from the gut. It won't necessarily It won't dramatically speed up the absorption time, but it can increase the amount of cannabinoids that are absorbed by your body overall. So it helps people get a little bit more bang for their buck. Now, a unique product form that we've got here in Pennsylvania that's pretty widely available are topical forms. And so the oils that are extracted from the marijuana plant can be infused with creams and lotions to use on the surface of the skin and can be absorbed locally. These generally have a fast onset. Your skin very readily absorbs the oils from the marijuana plant, but they don't absorb beyond the peripheral tissues. And so this limits their use in treating local pain and inflammation. Topicals do not absorb into the bloodstream, and so they do not have an effect on the entire body or the mind. This can be very useful for our patients who are looking to avoid the psychological effects of marijuana. But it's less useful for my folks who are dealing with systemic or body-wide conditions. These topicals tend to vary a lot by their strength, the consistency, whether someone wants a cream that is hydrating and light or a balm that is kind of oily and protective. They can also be formulated with other fragrances and other components. So these are useful to check for in case anybody has an aversion or an allergy. Now, there exists highly concentrated forms of cannabis oil. We are nothing if not innovative, and we've learned how to extract out just the oil from the cannabis plant and leave all the plant material behind. And that oil can be very, very highly concentrated, meaning it can contain a huge amount of cannabinoids and terpenes in just a very small amount of oil. And these concentrates can be used for clinical benefit, but because they contain a higher dose, they can carry the risk of greater side effects. And so concentrated forms of medical marijuana are not for the naive. They are generally reserved for my patients who have a very robust tolerance to cannabis, a long history of use, or very, very severe symptoms that require large doses of THC and or CBD. There are a lot of different forms of these concentrated forms of medical marijuana, what we call concentrates, because the oil that's extracted from the cannabis plant can then be manipulated in all sorts of different ways to achieve various consistencies. An example of a unique concentrated form of medical marijuana here is on the left. It's a type of oil that I described earlier called RSO, which stands for Rick Simpson oil. Like I said earlier, this is an ingestible form, meaning it can be taken by mouth. And it's a very potent full spectrum oil, meaning that it contains a whole portfolio of compounds from the cannabis plant. And that's because it's produced in a very simple way that brings a lot of components out of the plant. Now, these auxiliary components can support the actions of cannabinoids and terpenes. However, it makes an oil that would be unsafe to vaporize and inhale. So these can only be taken by mouth. Typically, these oils are so strong that they need to be packaged in forms like syringes so that small drops can be used at a time since they are so potent. Now that we've discussed the various forms of medical marijuana, let's talk a little bit about how these forms are used in practice to treat common symptoms of different chronic illnesses. So here in Pennsylvania, we've got a very wide array of conditions that will qualify somebody for medical marijuana therapy. In Pennsylvania, we've got 23 unique conditions, and it's rare for one treatment to treat so many different conditions, especially ones that are so diverse. We have got, and on a day-to-day basis, I see patients who have psychological conditions, various cancers, many different varieties of pain-related conditions, We might have dyskinetic, spastic movement conditions related to breakdown of nerves. We've got seizure disorders. We've got one immunological condition. We've also got a unique designation here in Pennsylvania that medical marijuana can be used to treat opioid use disorder. And there are a few qualifying conditions that are sort of umbrella of many different unique conditions underneath those. So we see a very wide array of patients on a day-to-day basis. And like I said, this is uncommon for any one treatment, which lends to the ability of cannabis to act on many different areas of the body and the mind. Now, I'm only going to cover some of the most commonly reported symptoms or motivations that these patients have for initiating medical cannabis therapy. And the first, without a doubt, is pain. And from what evidence we do have about the use of medical marijuana in pain, we know that THC, the greatest component or the most abundant component in marijuana, offers the greatest benefits, meaning the greatest pain reduction for chronic pain as opposed to acute pain that is neuropathic in nature or related to damage or misfiring of the nerves. So that's chronic neuropathic pain. Other non-chronic, non-neuropathic pain conditions can benefit from THC. However, we see the greatest pain reduction, the greatest response in patients who have chronic neuropathic pain. And because THC has the most significant analgesic effects, meaning pain-relieving effects, because all of our product forms contain some amount of THC in them, patients with chronic neuropathic pain stand to benefit from anything, but they have to take into account the characteristics of the product and how it fits into the treatment of their condition. So for some of my patients, our edible forms are ideal because they can provide measurable doses that can be easily increased or decreased. And the long length of effect allows them to dose less frequently, kind of take care of that background pain. Now, for some patients, an inhaled form, like a vaporizer, might be ideal for the treatment of their pain. Although THC offers the greatest benefits for chronic pain, there are a few acute pain conditions that stand to benefit from the pain-relieving effects of THC, and one of these is migraines. Migraines tend to come on very quickly and very abruptly, and for this reason, patients who suffer from migraines may not have 1 to 2 hours to wait for their capsule to kick in. So for these reasons, inhaled forms might be very useful. In addition, they can also be useful for tamping down breakthrough pain that is arising even when background pain is controlled. And for some patients, a topical form might be the most useful. If they've got pain that is limited to just a few areas of their body, or if they've got sort of comorbid muscle soreness, stiffness, and inflammation. Now, like I said, for my patients that have whole body pain, a cream or a lotion might not be the most ideal product form. But for certain patients with pain limited to just a few areas of their body, these can come in really handy, especially because they don't have any psychological side effects. Now, I would say the next most common symptom or motivation for initiating medical cannabis therapy that I hear on a day-to-day basis is to treat anxiety. And THC does have anxiety-relieving effects, but it can be dependent on dose. And so with THC, we see different effects at different doses. Low doses of THC can reduce anxiety. However, we see that high doses of THC can promote anxiety, which limits their use and the use of more concentrated forms. So for this reason, patients seeking to treat their anxiety with THC, I really preach the start low, go slow approach. This can be very useful so that someone doesn't end up experiencing greater anxiety when they initially wanted to treat it. So tinctures, like the one given here, are a great starting product for our patients dealing with anxiety. They, by virtue of being a sublingual or an ingestible product form, They have a slow onset, meaning they have a very subtle and gradual onset, and they have a long length of effect with measured doses that can be titrated up or down. This is a very, very useful product form because of this slow onset and this long length of effect. Now, besides THC, CBD on its own has been shown to reduce anxiety and in combination with THC. And because CBD has such a wide therapeutic window, it's very, very well tolerated, our dosing around this product is much more flexible. And I've seen very, very large doses used in some clinical studies that are generally well tolerated. So unlike THC, where you have to be a bit more careful not to stimulate anxiety rather than reduce it, with CBD, you can be a bit more liberal or flexible in your dosing, which is very useful. Now, the third most common motivation for folks to start medical cannabis therapy, regardless of their qualifying condition, tends to be insomnia or difficulty sleeping. And medical marijuana has effects on a lot of different unique aspects of sleep. And for this reason, different product forms, because of their characteristics, might be ideal for different difficulties in sleeping. We know from clinical research that THC has been shown to reduce the time it takes to get to sleep, decrease the number of awakenings after someone's fallen asleep, increase slow wave sleep, which is the deepest state of non-REM sleep. So I would say the second deepest stage of sleep, and actually decrease REM sleep, which is the deepest stage of sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And like I said, this is the deepest stage of sleep that occurs the latest in the night, closest to the morning, where people generally have the greatest instance of dreams and nightmares. And so the effects of marijuana on sleep we're still learning about them because they're confusing. Folks don't spend as much time in the deepest stages of sleep, but when they get up in the morning, they report better subjective effects. They feel like they are more well rested. And we're still learning why that is, but because of the lack or the reduction of time spent in REM sleep, where dreams and nightmares occur, THC can have the potential to reduce nightmare frequency and intensity. We're still learning about why this is and how to guarantee this effect a little bit more reliably, but this makes medical marijuana very, very useful in patients with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. Our literature shows that the effects of medical marijuana on insomnia tend to be most prominent with short-term use, and then over time with more consistent use, someone's body will build up a tolerance to these effects, and they may find them less useful. And like I said, the differences in onset and duration of the various product forms might make them useful for somebody who is having more trouble falling asleep versus somebody who's having more difficulty with nighttime awakenings. For the former, I might recommend an inhaled form. For the latter, I might recommend an edible form. But like I said, each treatment regimen is highly tailored to the patient's lifestyle. So now that we've discussed what marijuana is, why it's useful in humans, how to consume it, and for what reasons, let's talk a bit about getting involved in the Pennsylvania medical marijuana program. So just briefly, I want to give a bit of an overview of our program. Here in Pennsylvania, we have got 25 different licensed growers. They're called grower processors because not only do they grow marijuana, but they process it into all those different forms that I listed above. This does not include the 9 growing licenses that were granted to clinical registrants, and I'll explain a little bit about what that is later. But overall, we've got 31 different brands and companies, which is a very robust market. It's increased a lot over the years, and now we have a huge variety of products that are available for patients. Not only that, but you can find these growers' products at over 160 dispensaries in Pennsylvania. There are dispensaries in all areas of the state, and there's more opening up all the time. which is great for accessibility. In addition, here in Pennsylvania, we've got a unique aspect of our program that allows for a type of license called a clinical registrant. These clinical registrants are associated with other entities called academic clinical research centers, and together they do research on patients and products. It's a unique aspect of our program that codifies the ability to do research on cannabis, which is sorely, sorely needed. So Pennsylvania is definitely a front runner in cannabis research for this reason. In addition, we've got 7 different testing facilities that test the products created by the growers before they go to market in dispensaries around the state. So our program here is very robust. It's increased a lot over the years, and we're nearing 1 million registered patients and caregivers, which to me is incredible. We've got a little over 750,000 at the moment, and of those, about 400,000 are active patients. And this number is growing all the time. To become a patient, part of the process is to see an approved practitioner, and that pool is increasing steadily too. We are nearing 2,000 approved practitioners here in Pennsylvania, which again is great for accessibility and allows these patients to enter the program more smoothly. Our market in Pennsylvania has grown a lot over the years, and we're coming up on almost $5 billion in total sales since 2018, which is when some of our first dispensaries opened. And like I said earlier, we have 23 different qualifying conditions, and there are potential for more qualifying conditions to be added later on. So if you didn't see your condition on that list, fear not. Becoming a patient or a caregiver in the Pennsylvania medical marijuana program is fairly straightforward, but it can be a little tricky for a few reasons. To do this, the first step is to go online and create an account with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. This is free, it's quick, it can be done today. After that, patients will be evaluated by a doctor who is certified to recommend medical marijuana to their patients. This is a specific designation from the Department of Health. Not all doctors can do this, but like I said, the pool of doctors that can is growing steadily. That is to become a patient. Now, to become a caregiver, who is somebody who is allowed to purchase medical marijuana on a patient's behalf. To do this, caregivers will undergo fingerprinting and background check. It's important to note here that to become a patient or a caregiver, you have to be a citizen of Pennsylvania, meaning you have to live here and have some form of identification through the Department of Transportation. Either way, after this step is done, patients and caregivers will pay an annual fee to the Department of Health that will allow them to process their application, print their card, and then mail it to their house. And then once a patient or a caregiver has their ID card in hand, they can go to a dispensary and start shopping. Now, a select group of patients might want to participate or contribute to the research that's being done here in Pennsylvania. And Ethos, my company, is one of the places that they can go. We have a unique partnership with Thomas Jefferson University at Sidney Kimmel Medical College to develop and conduct research projects on medical marijuana and the people that use it. We have completed a few studies already. These have been published, and we have an ongoing study on the efficacy of medical marijuana in treating anxiety. We are putting together many more studies, studying different patient populations and conditions and symptoms. So keep an eye out for those. But we are just one of 9 companies that are associated with universities and medical centers. So besides Ethos and Thomas Jefferson, there are many different entities that are beginning to do research on marijuana and the people that use it. And so if you are interested in getting involved and contributing to the state of research, it's getting easier all the time, and I'm happy to provide resources for anybody who is interested in that. But this concludes our presentation today, and so I'm happy to start taking some questions.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's great information. It really breaks down, I think, a lot of the questions that are out there. I know I learned a lot as somebody who has been thinking about it and talking about it, but just hasn't actually pulled the trigger yet. That this is going to make me do that. So there are a couple questions. So I'm going to put them up and let's see. So Izzy Kaufman said, do you have to only use MMJ at home?
That's a great question. Patients do not only have to use MMJ at home, but using medical marijuana in public is kind of a sticking point for a lot of folks. And so I know certain communities might be more accepting of this than others, but there's a bit of flexibility here in Philadelphia where I live. It's quite normalized, and for this reason, it reduces a lot of the anxiety around the medical marijuana using experience. And so there are plenty of times and places where it might be more or less appropriate to use medical marijuana, but you're not restricted to just the walls of your house.
Okay. The next is, topically, is cream or oils better? And are they allergy friendly?
This is a very, very good question. There's no better between creams or oils. Now, they do have some unique differences. So creams tend to absorb very quickly, and they can be hydrating, so they can be used on dry skin, although I would not recommend using cannabis-infused topical on broken or bleeding skin or an open wound. Now, oils, I have a few questions about what that might mean, but I'm getting the sense that it might mean a very thin oil, similar to the oils that are consumed in tinctures. Now, oils also absorb very readily into the skin. They are not as hydrating, and here in Pennsylvania, we do have some very oily topical forms called salves. Salves are similar in consistency to like Vaseline, for example. Vaseline, very oily, and it absorbs well, but it also sits on top of the skin for a while. It is not as hydrating as a cream or a lotion, but it can be protective. Now, are they allergy friendly? Very, very good caveat to this question. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, THC acts on CB2 receptors that are found in your immune system. And so generally, the effect that THC has on the immune system is to reduce the signaling and the mobilization and basically the action of the immune system. And so generally, THC does not trigger an allergy. I suppose it's possible, albeit rare, but the other components in a cream or a topical do have the potential to trigger an allergy. So it's always a good measure to go over those auxiliary components with someone before settling on a product. Because even if they're not a true allergy, it can be irritating, it can be off-putting, and it can kind of ruin the experience. And I don't want to get somebody something they're not going to use. So even if the smell is overwhelming or unpleasant, that's a consideration that I make. So some of them can be allergy friendly, but it's very important to check.
Great. Another question. What should someone try first for joint pain if they've never tried it before?
This is a great question. For joint pain, a number of different product forms can be useful. Now, if somebody has never, ever used cannabis before, the systemic and the psychological effects might be surprising. It's kind of hard to put them into words sometimes, so I could sit here all day and describe what the effects might be, but it's hard to really know what they are until you've experienced them. For some, these systemic and psychological effects are very pleasant, but for others, not so much. So folks with joint pain are one of the few types of pain conditions that I think might really benefit from a topical. And that depends on the joint that's involved. For the small joints, Topicals tend to absorb very readily and have a very robust response. But for large joints, like the hips or the knees, somebody might have to use a very generous amount of cream or lotion, and their usefulness might be a bit more restricted. Now, like I said, creams and lotions don't absorb into the body and have systemic effects or psychological effects, meaning this is a very safe product to start with for someone who's never used cannabis in any capacity before. For somebody who has joint pain that afflicts multiple joints around their body, a systemic form like an ingestible or an inhaled form might be more useful in the end. There's kind of two ways to go about it. You can kind of come at it from the outside or the inside or both for patients that really know what they're doing.
Great. There was a question from YouTube that says, do tinctures have a taste or can they have a taste?
Here in Pennsylvania, we've got both unflavored and flavored tinctures. The taste of cannabis oil is not very robust. Like I said, cannabis can have a very strong smell, and smell can be associated with a flavor. But on its own, cannabis oil, when it's diluted into a very kind of characterless carrier oil like MCT oil, it generally doesn't have much of a taste. So it's very easy to create oils and tinctures that are unflavored. However, many companies do flavor their tinctures. And again, this is another important thing to check on with someone so that they don't ingest something that might trigger an allergy. Many of the tinctures that we have here in the Pennsylvania Medical Marijuana Program are flavored in some capacity. And even if those don't trigger an allergy, they might be a little off-putting. So it's important to, like I said, go over the auxiliary components that are in tinctures before purchasing.
All right, let's see if here's a good one.
Okay.
Does MM give you the munchies like the old-fashioned kind?
Does MM give you the munchies like the old-fashioned kind? This is a question that might open up a very large discussion. But does medical marijuana give you the munchies like the old-fashioned kind of marijuana that people used back in the day? Medical marijuana, when you're utilizing the plant on its own, does not have inherent differences from marijuana that is used recreationally, for example. It is the intention and the application that makes marijuana medical. And for this reason, actually, the marijuana that's available in the medical marijuana program is, I would say, truly medical grade. It can be very, very potent because our growing techniques have gotten a lot better as we've been able to do it legally. So for this reason, the effects can be much more robust. And so medical marijuana might stimulate appetite to a greater degree than marijuana that was grown 20, 30, 40 years ago that didn't have nearly the same amount of cannabinoids or terpenes. And so it's no guarantee that someone will have just appetite stimulation using one product or another. Generally, we see this effect associated with THC content. And like I said, THC content is being bumped up more and more as our growing techniques get better and better, and we combine marijuana genetics in new and exciting ways. And so for this reason, and because there's such a wide variability in response to marijuana between patients, it's hard to guarantee whether a product will or will not stimulate your appetite. Like I said, because this is associated with THC content generally, there are ways to control for it, like using a low THC or a CBD dominant product. But overall, I can't just say yes and I can't just say no. I would say there's a greater likelihood nowadays because our growing techniques have gotten a lot better and our dry forms of marijuana have gotten much more potent. So it may give somebody greater appetite stimulation than they were expecting. But again, what makes marijuana medical, it often comes down to the intentions and the use. So if you've just been served up a hot dinner, you're already looking at it and licking your lips, you might start to feel appetite stimulation.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Next question. Who can come into a dispensary with you when you make your purchase? Examples, somebody with a disability who has a personal attendant.
Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, the only folks allowed into a dispensary are active card holders, meaning a patient or their caregiver. Um, well, the counterexample to this is that minors are allowed in dispensary. So if a patient is a parent of a child who's under the age of 18, the child can accompany them. But somebody with a disability who has a personal attendant who wants to bring them into the dispensary, I would highly recommend that the patient have their personal attendant go through the process of becoming their caregiver so that they can shop together. This often confuses people. It's not well explained by our medical marijuana program, so often we get couples and parents and children showing up where we have to kindly ask one party to wait outside. And so to guarantee entrance into a dispensary, you've got to have an active patient or caregiver ID.
So what is the difference? There's actually, if you go online, there is a box for a personal attendant.
Well, I know the word caregiver can be really vague, and it's used in the healthcare world in a lot of different respects. In Pennsylvania, it refers to a specific person who has gone through the process of signing up in the program. They've received a background check and fingerprinting. They've paid their state fee, and they receive an ID card in the mail. Theirs says caregiver on the top, but it'll have their picture and it'll have a start and an end date. Once a caregiver has gotten their card, they need to link that with their patient's card. So if they ever come on their own without their patient, they can still purchase on their behalf through the point of sale software that we use. This act of linking a caregiver to a patient can be done when you sign up for the program as a caregiver, or it can be done later. Now, patients can have multiple caregivers, and caregivers can have multiple patients. But if it's someone that works closely with a patient and is going to kind of be their only one, then they can either come in with the patient, or like I said, they can come in on their own later, as long as their accounts and their cards are properly linked. And that process can be a little tricky, but we here at the dispensary encounter it all the time. We're kind of experts in this. So if you haven't had trouble, we can help them.
I know that I hear a lot of people in the community talk about the expense of getting your card. And I know that I'm not even sure what they are because I haven't gone through the process myself. Do you know if the caregiver card is the same cost as the user's card?
Typically, it can even be cheaper. And so when somebody is becoming a patient in the program, they'll encounter two expenses generally. Because they need to be evaluated by a certifying physician, they often will charge for that appointment. If it's somebody's doctor that they already see, they might have to pay a copay when they go see them, but that's the first expense. And then they'll have to pay a separate fee to the Department of Health. Nowadays, this fee is waived for folks who receive a state benefits program like SNAP, Social Security, and so on. And so that's fantastic. That eliminates that expense entirely. Normally, it's a $50 fee each year. But those are two expenses that a patient will encounter when they become, or in the process of becoming a patient in the medical marijuana program. Caregivers will also incur two similar expenses. Now, instead of going to see a certifying physician, they have to pay for fingerprinting and a background check. That can be a lot cheaper generally. They'll also have to pay the same $50 fee to the Department of Health, unless, like I said, they receive one of those similar state benefits programs, in which case it'll be free. So oftentimes, when you tally up everything, it can be cheaper for a caregiver to get their card than it can be for a patient. And overall, the upfront cost is an unfortunate aspect of our program because it limits accessibility. But to answer your question, to become a caregiver, actually, it can be cheaper at the end of the day.
Okay, that's great. Can you explain again the people who have state assistance? Are you saying like county assistance, like their access cards, their SNAP benefits, the SSI or SSD, those type of things? There's a fee waiver for those?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This fee doesn't just get automatically like applied, which some people think. But if somebody receives one of these programs in their patient account, when it comes time to pay the Department of Health, they can check a couple boxes, sign and date, and then the fee will be waived. So you still have to go online and still have to do something. It doesn't just get done automatically, but in the end, it incurs no cost.
Okay. That's really good to know, because I know a lot of people have talked about how the costs are like $400. I've heard that number come out plenty of times. And, I'm just like, well, I'm not sure how somebody who lives on a fixed income comes up with that kind of money. But I'm happy to hear that there are these services.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that is very useful knowledge to
Mhm.
have,
Mhm.
because I think it will make a huge difference in people who sign up.
Absolutely. And it's part of a multi-phase process called the MMAP, or the Medical Marijuana Assistance Program.
Mhm.
Our state, our Department of Health wants to make medical marijuana more accessible for low-income patients who are on a fixed income. And so eliminating that renewal fee is just phase two of a three-phase process. The third process is to provide stipends or fee reductions at the point of sale, actually reduce the cost of goods in the end, which I would love to see that roll out as soon as possible. But I know the Department of Health is quite busy at the moment. But I would say that most of the costs associated with becoming a patient in the medical marijuana program are associated with going to make an appointment with a certified doctor. And like I said, more and more doctors are learning about marijuana and taking the training needed to recommend it to their patients. And so it's getting more competitive, and for that reason, I think the prices are lowering all the time. I know there are a whole variety of certifying doctors that a patient can go see here in Philadelphia, but we're a
Mhm.
very populous area, so I can understand that out in less populated parts of Pennsylvania, there may only be one doctor to be able to certify patients in that town, for example. And so, like I said, as more doctors can provide the service, I think it'll become more competitive and the cost will come down.
That's great. So my question, and something I always think about, well, something I've thought about, I guess, is, so I have a friend out in Las Vegas, um, who um, who uses what he calls a dummy gummy that with his card he can buy. Is that something that Pennsylvania is discussing, is having more types of edibles?
Yes. So this is been discussed since day one and will be discussed until the end of time. In Pennsylvania, we are unfortunately not allowed to sell infused food items like gummies, cookies, candies, and so on. The reason for this is that when crafting our medical marijuana bill, our legislature didn't want anything available that might be appealing to children. And for the same reason, child resistant packaging has to be used on all product forms. And so we cannot sell things like gummies here in Pennsylvania. Different companies have tried. They've tried to come out with sort of like lozenge type products, and people on our medical marijuana advisory board have made the recommendation to allow different product forms like lozenges and troches and even gummies many times, but our Department of Health is holding steadfast. And so it's uncertain if or when products like those found in Las Vegas will be available.
Hmm.
But there are plenty of products that can be used to make gummies if somebody is savvy in the kitchen. This requires, to do a bit of math to figure out the dosing and prepare the recipe ahead of time. But
Hmm.
there are product forms here in Pennsylvania that can be used to effectively make the products that we can't sell on the shelves. And for my patients who, like I said, are savvy, I'm more than happy to give them some counseling on how to do this properly.
Great. That's it was a it, it's one of those things that there's lots of conversation about. And I know that I have friends that infuse it in oils to cook with. Is there a certain kind that you should be using, or is there? It really depends on what you want.
To cook with?
Hmm.
Um, That's a tricky question. I would say to tailor it to the recipe that you're going to eventually use. The most, I would say, versatile oil that cannabis oil can be infused into, I would say, is just coconut oil. Coconut oil is very, very useful. It's very versatile. It can be used in a lot of different products. And coconut oil is what they will refine to get MCT oil, which is that benign, characterless oil that's used in the tinctures. And so cannabis oil dissolves into coconut oil very readily. And then that coconut oil can be used in a recipe as an oil or a fat substitute, can be used to cook with. And coconut oil can even form the base of what will become a topical. If you add some other components and fragrances and so on. So I normally recommend coconut oil because it is just the most versatile by far.
Okay, that's great. Well, it is 4 o'clock, and this has been an amazing hour. Lots of great information. I hope everybody out there got some great information, and I love the fact that if you missed some of it, it is on Facebook, it is on our YouTube channel, and it is also on Twitter. So you don't miss that. Don't miss the whole conversation if you miss parts of it. Also, on our website this week we'll be adding their website and some of the PDFs that they have given us for more information. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to Vicki at disabilitypridepa.org, and she will make sure, or I will make sure. Hello. I'm always talking about myself in the third person. I will make sure that I get those questions to Andy or one of his staff and get those answers for you. Thank you again. I had a wonderful day. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Rita Jo, as she is the best interpreter. And I hope to see you all next month when we're going to be talking to Triple from Western PA. We'll see you all very soon.